Assalamu alaikum dear students, and welcome to Allma Iqbal Open University TV studio. We are back with another unit of English Compulsory 2 with the code 142454119408 for BA and BS. Today we will start with Unit 3, that is about classification. So far we have discussed the characteristics and features of academic writing. We have also talked about the structure of an academic piece of writing. Today we'll move on to classification. The writing that uses classification in fact groups items according to an underlying shared characteristic. In classification writing, we make categories of different items and objects based on certain similarities. Classification makes it easy for the writers and the readers to understand objects or items under consideration. Because when items are grouped, it becomes easy to understand most of them under one category. You must have seen scientists and other people from other fields classifying and categorizing things and objects that they are studying. You must have seen that even in nature, scientists categorize two main classifications, or they categorize two main groups. They have animal kingdom and plant kingdom. And then they make further categories, what may be called subcategories or classes, so that all the animals who show same characteristics come under one head. For example, an animal will be titled a mammal if it shares the characteristics of all other mammals in the group. So it becomes easy for the readers, for the students, and also for the researchers to carry on their research while they categorize and classify. So the writing that uses classification and categorizing and grouping is something that involves a prior knowledge by the teacher or the student who's doing the writing. So once you are ready to write using classification, you should classify or group the objects under discussion into certain categories. Once you have categorized all the material, it will become easy for you to write using classification techniques. Dear students, if you remember, in the last unit on sequence writing, we have talked about transitional expressions. We use transitional expression for sequence writing to make connection among the ideas that you were writing on. We have already said that transitions are like bridges that lead the readers into the line of thought of the writer. So today we'll also be talking about the transitional expressions that can be used while you're writing classification. To make you more aware of how classification writing is done, I brought certain examples for you to look at and analyze. The first example that we have is a paragraph where a student is classifying different building safety codes that have been violated. You can see the paragraph on the screen. A public health student, Marian Glaser, did a detailed analysis of 180 cases of building code violation. Each case represented a single building, almost all of which were multiple unit dwellings. In these 180 buildings, there were an incredible total of 1,244 different recorded violations, about 7 per building. What did the violations consist of? First of all, over 1/3 of the violations were exterior defects, broken doors and stairways, holes in the walls, sagging roofs, broken chimneys, damaged porches, and so on. Another 1/3 were interior violations that could scarcely be attributed to the most ingeniously destructive rural southern migrant in America. There were, for example, a total of 160 instances of defective wiring or other electrical hazards, a very common cause of the excessive number of fires and needless tragic deaths in the slums. There were 120 instances of inadequate, defective, or inoperable plumbing or heating. There were 34 instances of serious infestation by rats and roaches. Dear students, keep on looking and analyzing at the paragraph, and you'll come to see that the student has discussed around 180 buildings that have a total of 1,244 different recorded violations. It would have taken Marion Glaser a lot of space to discuss all these 1,244 different recorded violations individually. So what she found was that she could group them according to the kind of violations they were. Once she grouped them in one paragraph, she could very easily tell you what kind of violations were seen in these 180 buildings. So dear students, once you looked at the paragraph, you can see that even things that are very large or big in number can be discussed in a smaller space if you group them or if you categorize them. That saves you the trouble of discussing each and every item individually. Rather, you can discuss them in groups, and once you discuss all the groups, it becomes very easy for the readers to understand all the items or objects under consideration. I have another example for you to look at. Dear students, you will look at another paragraph where the writer has categorized the city dwellers of New York. The writer believes that there are three kinds of people who dwell New York. And then, out of that classification, she only describes these three groups. And suddenly, after reading one paragraph, you seem to understand almost the whole population of New York. There are roughly three New Yorks. There is, first, the New York of the man or woman who was born here, who takes the city for granted and accepts its size and its turbulence as natural and inevitable. Second, there is the New York of the commuter, the city that is devoured by locusts each day and spat out each night. Third, there is the New York of the person who was born somewhere else and came to New York in quest of something. Of these three trembling cities, the greatest is the last, the city of final destination, the city that is a goal. It is this third city that accounts for New York's high-strung disposition, its poetical deportment, its dedication to the arts, and its incomparable achievements. Commuters give the city its tidal restlessness. Natives give its solidity and continuity, but the settlers give it passion. And whether it is a farmer arriving from Italy to set up a small grocery store in a slum, or a young girl arriving from a small town in Mississippi to escape the indignity of being observed by her neighbors, or a boy arriving from the Corn Belt with a manuscript in his suitcase and a pain in his heart, it makes no difference. Each embraces New York with the intense excitement of first love. Each absorbs New York with the fresh eyes of an adventurer. Each generates heat and light to dwarf the consolidated Addison Company. Looking closely at the paragraph will show you that the writer has used several transitional expressions. Once she has categorized the three New Yorks, she describes the first, second, and the third. So, you can see, students, that by categorizing, the writers can talk about bigger details and longer details and can simply squeeze them into one paragraph or two. So in this way, once you classify the people, classify the objects or the items that you are talking about, it becomes easy for the writer to talk about them in groups. Similarly, as it becomes easy for the readers and the students to get to know them well. So classification is one such technique where it is easy for the writer to talk about a larger group or talk about a larger number of items in a small space. In the last paragraph that you just saw about New York, the writer has talked about the whole population of a city in just 3 categories. And by dividing them in 3 categories, it has become easy for the writer to describe the 3 categories and to give her opinion. So the writing that uses classification makes it easy for the writers to give their opinion about objects and to describe them. Instead of describing each and every item individually, they can simply describe the whole group, and all the members of the group share some characteristic. They have some similarities, and that is why the description applies to almost all the members of a group. We'll now move on to the transitional expressions, some of them that can be used while writing using classification. You have a whole list of transitional expressions that you can use while writing using classification. The first category, the second category, one category, the next category, a more important category, the most important category, can be categorized as, may be grouped into, is classified as, and several varieties of. These are some of the transitional expressions that writers normally use while they are writing using classification. There are many more that you may find somewhere in books or in notebooks, or in your, maybe you can devise some more while you're writing. You can even find many in your own book in Unit 3. There are many in the exercises that you have to attempt on the unit. Similarly, you can take out some of the transitional expressions for classification from the 2 paragraphs that we have just discussed. Now, recalling Unit 1, students, you remember that we had talked about the construction and structure of an essay. I have just read out to you 2 paragraphs, giving you examples for how to write using classification in a paragraph. This technique can be extended into writing an essay. We have talked about the structure of an essay in Unit 1 about academic writing. We had talked about the very structure of academic essay that starts with an introduction, has some body paragraphs, and then it concludes with a conclusion. So on the screen, you'll see a tree diagram that tells you how is it that when you write an essay on classification, how can you classify the information. You can see that the introductory paragraph will include what is going to be categorized, the purpose of the essay, and the thesis statement that identifies the categories. In body paragraphs, you will be defining and describing, discussing, and explaining different categories, giving examples. There is category 1 that explains the criteria of being put into this category. Then it discusses the strengths and weaknesses. It gives the examples that would fit into the category. Same will go on for the other 2 categories. There may be more categories than 3. Then there is conclusion, which includes a brief summary on each category and a recommendation or suggestion of the one category over the others, which is optional and is totally dependent on the will of the writer if he wants to give these recommendations or suggestions. This structure, dear students, is the same that we have discussed in Chapter 1 on academic writing. You will notice something very interesting in this structure. The structure is itself a kind of a tree diagram. In the unit, you will be familiarized with what a tree diagram is and how is it that it helps classifying certain items and objects. Now, when you look at this tree diagram on the screen, you'll see that the writer has kind of classified introductory paragraph and then body paragraph and then conclusion, and then that classification is further divided into 3 further categories. So, dear students, this much will help you to write using classification. I'll repeat that classification helps where there are many objects that need to be discussed, and a writer may not find it necessary or easy maybe to write on all of them individually. There is a fear that even maybe the readers may not enjoy the repetition, because while you are discussing objects individually, there will be many similarities between them. And reading the same thing over and over again can put off the reader, and it becomes really very hard for the writer to put on the paper. So, in order to control the length of your academic piece of writing and to make it interesting for your readers, it is advised that you classify the objects under discussion into different categories and groups. And instead of just discussing all of them individually, you discuss the characteristics of that group or that category. When you discuss the characteristics of that group or that category, you can then add examples about the objects that you're using. In this way, it will also help the memory of the readers. It will help them remember the characteristics of different objects that they've just studied. So classification is also done because it is helpful for the memory and for the description. We have also discussed some of the transitional expressions that are helpful for the students, for the writers, all kinds of writers who are writing using classification. If you use these transitional expressions, be careful and be aware that sometimes an extra use of transitional expressions may baffle or confuse the readers. So, you need to use them where necessary. And also do use a transitional expression once you are talking about another category. Once you are done with one category and you're about to start another category, do use a transitional expression so that your reader always knows that you have started discussing a separate category. Students, the diagram on the screen shows you that there is a kind of a classification that we have already done in this essay. In fact, this is also kind of a classification where you classify all the material that you have for writing an essay. You classify it into an introductory paragraph, into body paragraphs, and conclusion. And then this classification goes on and on. When you categorize and classify different body paragraphs with certain different information, even then you are classifying. So, very interestingly, you have noticed that even writing the essay and dividing it into 3 parts, all the 3 structures, and then putting down the information or categorizing the information that you have on the topic among all these 3 parts is a kind of classification that you're already experiencing. It is said, dear students, that a good way of writing the essay is that you put down and jot down all the information that you may have on a topic. Once you have jotted down all the information and whatever comes to your mind on a piece of paper, it will become easy for you to write down the essay itself. After putting down or jotting down all the information or whatever comes to your mind on a piece of paper, that is normally called brainstorming. Once you have brainstormed a topic that you're going to write an essay on, then you can classify all that information. That there again, you use the technique of classification. And how is it that to classify that information? You classify that information according to what would go into the introduction, if there are any definitions, if there are any historical backgrounds, if there are any anything that you think might be going into the introduction would go for introductory paragraphs. And then there'll be some information that you think must come in the body paragraphs. In that information, you will be again classifying them to put what should be put where. which information the body paragraphs will start with, which will go in the first paragraph, which will go in the second paragraph, and so on and so forth. For example, if it is something like unemployment, if you're writing on unemployment in a society, you may be giving causes of that unemployment and you may be offering some certain solutions. So you'll make different paragraphs for each cause of unemployment. So you'll be classifying all these causes and putting them in certain different paragraphs where they match the given information. You cannot always discuss each and every cause of something in detail while writing an academic essay. So, in order to control the space, in order to control the number of words, and sometimes in order to control some information and devise it in a manner that it becomes interesting for the readers, you'll be giving it out in groups and categories. So what you do is that you classify the causes of unemployment, and then those groups are discussed in each paragraph in the body paragraphs. Similarly, there will be some information from the brainstorming piece that will be going in the conclusion. In that case, you'll be putting that information in conclusion. So, very interestingly and surprisingly, you have seen that since ages maybe in your academic career, you have been classifying and categorizing material. And as students, it always helps making mind maps, making tree diagrams to memorize the material better. So dear students, this was all for writing using classification. You have learned how to write using classification, how to classify and how to jot down and put down information after you have classified, whether it be a paragraph or an essay. You have also come to know about the transitional expressions that you can use while writing using classification. You can use these transitions or many others. You'll find a good number of them in the book that you have. So this lesson, along with the book that you have, will give you a very clear idea and will help you a lot in writing using classification. Thank you very much.